Hello, everyone. So glad you're all able to join us today. Today's a little bit different. We actually will have two special presentations. The first one is 40 minutes with our initial group. The second presentation will be another 40 minutes. We're very excited about this program for this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are today. So our first topic today is building an infrastructure for equity. We have a great team of presenters with us today, starting with Dr. Joseph Santini. He works at the Clare Center as the DOI, Director of Instruction. He has a rich experience and background working with bilingual publications, focusing on instruction and equity with various groups of community members and stakeholders in his educational career. Our other presenters, let me pull up my notes here, is Lisa Montalvo. She is a counselor and has been working at the Clare Center at MSSD. Our third presenter today is Francisca Rangel, who works for K through second grade as an ASL teacher, also at the Clare Center. She's been heavily involved in social justice and their committee in a variety of programs within the bilingual education, as well as cultural equity and diversity. And she has spent many years as part of that group. So welcome to our three presenters. I do want to remind everyone as we're getting started, the three will have their videos on with the PowerPoint. While they're presenting, please remain video off. If you're wanting to ask questions, please hold those questions until the end of their presentation. And if you see there at the bottom, click the reactions icon, and you can also see raise hand and click on that, and then you can open your own camera and then pose your question. We also have two wonderful interpreters with us today who will be supporting the entire presentation. So welcome to Dr. Santini. Hello, hi, thank you so much. Really appreciate that wonderful welcome. No problem. If I could go ahead and invite Lisa and Francisca to show up on screen as well.
Hello. Hola.
Great, I think we're ready to get going. Okay, the floor is yours. Great, I'll go ahead and share our PowerPoint. As you can see here, building the infrastructure for equity. And that will be the framework for our discussion today. We're really looking forward to talking about the work that we're doing at MSSD, KDES, and the Clare Center. This includes creating space for our students, our teachers, our staff, and others. First of all, we will do some introductions. Lisa, would you like to get us started?
Hello, this is Lisa Montalvo, school counselor at MSSD for the last 14 years. I've been involved in social justice, and I will share more later. Thank you for inviting us to share our experiences here. Hello, my name is Francisca Rangel, and I'm at close to 30 years here, plus at another school as well. So altogether 30 years. I'm excited to share our experience with you all. Thank you for selecting our proposal.
And this is my sign name, Joseph. It's because I used to teach in New York, and that was a sign name given to me in that previous life. So that's my sign name. And what to expect from this sign name or from this presentation today is just, well, actually, how about I show you our agenda first before we get started. As you see here, our agenda, there are a few things we're hoping to cover today. First of all, I do want to talk a little bit about my journey as an activist, and then moving on to administrator, which is my current role. So I'll talk a little bit about my previous work and how that's impacted what I'm doing here at the Clare Center. Lisa and Francisca will also share about their experience and their work directly with students, whereas I work with teachers and staff. So our experiences are a little bit different. So I'm looking forward to talking about all perspectives that we bring to the fore as part of this. Also, we're hoping that you get inspired, get some ideas for your own school. We're very excited to hear your thoughts and questions throughout our presentation. So now I will ask Francisca and Lisa to go ahead and stop video, and then I will turn it over to them when I'm done with my piece.
Sure, sure.
I do want to explain a little bit about my background. I'm from New York City, born there. My parents are both immigrants. My father moved from Puerto Rico, and I call us immigrants because he moved here from Puerto Rico prior to Puerto Rico becoming a US territory. My mother's family immigrated from Lebanon, and they both moved to New York City. So I have that direct experience for what it's like to be a person growing up in the education system who was white or perhaps not a typical student. And so that really impacted me from leaving the mainstream school system to going to MSSD. And at that time, they were already incorporating some bilingual education. And that really impacted my worldview, my thought world, and the way in which I perceived the world around me. I became a school administrator, and previously I'd been an activist, part of protests and what have you, whereas now I'm more in the system, talking about how we can create a space for equity. And that's really my guiding question for this presentation. Relationships. We say that word a lot, especially in the last couple of years. I'm sure all of your schools are seeing a key focus being placed on relationships. They are important. We see different people having different interpretations about what that actually means. I read a book called Coaching for Equity. It's by Elena Aguilar, and that book touches upon what relationships mean. A lot of people think relationships are about an empathetic, personal, intimate relationship or friendship. Whereas Aguilar says that really the first step in constructing a relationship is actually based on inequity. For equity work, it talks to, I'm sorry, say that again?
Integrity.
Thank you, integrity. And so understanding those expectations, and it requires integrity. And so those are important words that are foundational to the equity work that we do. Upon my arrival at the Clare Center and working with teachers there at Kindle, I recognized that those teachers were already having those discussions about relationships, equity, race, social justice. And coming in as a leader, I really had to consider what was my role. How could I support this group? Rather than just joining in, becoming a leader and providing ideas, it really required me to join in as a passive member of that group, to take in the work they were doing, to learn more about their thoughts and opinions, and see where I could further provide support. So I asked if they'd be willing to have me join. And I could see that there was some anxiety behind my joining in with them. But I know that that is part of the initial authentic relationship building process. And it's truly expanded now. We see more members for our social justice committee, and that committee has become a formal part of our school programming. So once I joined in with that group, let me talk a little bit about what we did next. That group from Kindle included Francisca as part of the presentation today. And it was so important to build that space in which we could share, unpack, and reflect. And so, Francisca, if you recall early on when I joined in with that group, what do you remember from that?
I do. Before we had the social justice group and multicultural planning committee, there was, within our school, we had a lot of restructuring and a lot of new administration and interactions where we didn't have a place for voice, for perspective, for their feedback. It wasn't offered, or there was no offer to listen to us. And so what we would do is meet after school hours. We would communicate through Marco Polo instead of work email because we felt like we didn't feel safe. We looked like we were bad people, but it wasn't that. It was that we had different perspectives. It wasn't inclusive. It was not culturally sensitive. So we were able to listen to each other's experiences, and we wanted to feel present and there instead of invisible. We wanted to feel valued and cherished. So we met together as a group, and it became on a personal level. We would celebrate our birthdays and celebrations. We would go out and we became a core group of the three of us. And that's where we started the social justice, and we carried it to where we are today.
Absolutely. And from that group, starting with 3 people, others continued to join. And then we ended up setting up a high school committee. We established the same sort of committee for our student lives, meaning our dorm and residential. We set up the committee, different groups. We have Black professionals here at Clare Center. We have an AAPI group. And so we wanted to set a space for the different individuals to be able to share their thoughts and opinions. Keeping in mind that who is largely responsible for that process is some of our administrators within Clare. The 2 individuals who were part of that were really instrumental and committed to the work we were doing. In establishing those committees, they also followed our line of thinking. They set up their own space for staff and teachers in order to meet with both of them. We developed an equity plan for the Clare Center and developed that for addressing community members, any concerns that may be brought regarding the school or instruction. And so it was really great to have that information sharing to happen with them. So they were able to approach the committees, to be present, to listen to all. And so many of the committees felt really heard, that they were recognizing their needs. And I worked directly with staff, with teachers, with students, and they all felt comfortable taking that directly to them, and that they all felt part of the community. It's been a really beautiful process. So when we set up this group, we talked about sharing, unpacking. And it's okay to have that discussion. That is an important part of the process. At the same time, we also need to be considerate of planning and addressing issues, which means identifying what are those serious issues that need to be addressed. It's also important too that we provide training and support for our staff so they can be a part of the equity work. One example in how in which we went through that and looking for and identifying those challenges to equity is we first started looking at the data, looking at statistics. Data is of huge importance. Having that data information really helped us identify our gaps. Looking at our school, 60% of our students are BIPOC students, whether they be Black, Latino, Indigenous communities here. And so we also looked at disciplinary consequences and where we saw any sort of differences or disjointedness between our data. And looking at our staffing levels, our disciplinary practices, all of that was considered. Looking at our retention, enrollment, all of that need to be viewed through an equity lens. And to have that included as part of the process is so necessary. Our school and here at the Clare Center invested an entire year of having training from the Critical Thought School. Andrea was the one who helped with that training, and that included 25 hours of individualized training and discussion for each department within the Clare Center. We followed the instruction from an author by the name of Rosemary Hines. And Hines placed great emphasis on each school, everyone from the administrative assistant to the accounting department has an impact on how the school is represented in terms of equity. Also, we began implementing building stronger organizations with outside organizations. So one large organization in the United States for social justice, and what was that, Alvina? It's based on writing from an author by the name of Howard Zinn, provided the foundation for this, providing workshops, discussions, and reading groups online for K-12 programming. Most of it is free. Oftentimes they provide interpreters. They're very inclusive, and our school is able to partake in their workshops to take their ideas back to our school. And that also includes local groups. For example, the DC area, they have social justice organizations that oftentimes host monthly workshops here. And so we, again, wanted to be involved in that. We were involved with PBS Classroom. They had evening workshops that was run by PBS. We've been involved in various organizations, and we've truly benefited bringing back some of those resources that we may have not previously seen Schools for the Deaf. And we've been so thankful to grow those partnerships. One big lesson that all of us have taken away from this process throughout training, throughout the development and planning phases that we've done together, we recognize that all identities are multiple. And that philosophy became the foundation for a great deal of our work. For example, we set up a social justice committee for the entire school. And the members of that committee set up a multicultural planning committee. And that committee, Lisa and Francisca will talk further about. However, my point being is that oftentimes schools will perhaps do something on a monthly basis, for example, Black History Month or a particular heritage month, and they will focus on it for that month and that be it. In the US, as we celebrate identity and multiple identities, we sometimes celebrate them in silos. But let's be honest, the world, that's not the case. You can be female and Black. You can be Latino and LGBT. Again, all identities are multiple. So establishing a year-round calendar for equity work, and that should include a variety of identities in each month. And so in sharing some of that, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, you will see those resources. Another big lesson in which we've taken away is that oftentimes schools or programs will bring in a presenter one time for equity related topic or a one-time workshop, which is good. By all means, it has benefit, but this is ongoing work, and therefore you have to create a system for ongoing work. Some schools may have a chief diversity officer, a CDO. For the Clare Center, we recognize that we have a very diverse population. We have a very diverse community. And so we decided to support our social justice equity community to be a formal part of the Clare Center operations. All of the work that we do for social justice is paid membership of our staff, first and foremost. All of them have specific responsibilities outlined for them. It can include coaching other employees, how to dialogue about this, establishing different events for the school, working with administrators as possible to provide support, ideas, and resources for social justice topics, such as hosting events, presentations, and workshops for the community as a bit of education. So all of that is part of our system, and it pervades into each department, ensuring that we are equity heavy and that we have equity resources that folks are able to address and ask for support. So that system is ongoing. It's beyond workshops. It's beyond just my time. And hopefully this will continue beyond my career with the Clare Center. It's important as well to remember that social justice, the work for equity, has a purpose. The purpose being better outcomes for our students. We want to see all of our students to be set for success post-secondary life. That's our number one priority as school leaders. And part of that process is providing school leaders with the resources to ensure their students are successful. So when we set up the Social Justice Committee, when we made that formally part of our school, we were able to see the benefit for us as school leaders in our ability to provide thoughts, responses to the community, and we end up becoming a conduit to share opinions that other groups may not have previously had access to, the ability to be present. Also within the Social Justice Committee is we were able to take on responsibility for developing and adding resources. Francisca and Lisa will talk further about that, and I will let them. Lisa, Francisca, would y'all like to come up and begin your piece?
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So now you can see the diversity in the social justice groups at the Clare Center. There's just such a great team we have here that are motivated and dedicated to do the social justice work. I want to share the story of how the Multicultural and Social Justice Planning Committee was established. So it all started last year during the virtual MSSD. And Joseph and I collaborated with the Lexington School for the Deaf in New York. And we collaborated on pulling some different people together, which I'll explain more about that. But we wanted to collaborate with them as time came closer to the Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. They wanted to create another one, like a Native American Heritage Month. And so it started to, snowball. We worked together and we grew that. And on the next slide, you'll see a lot of the different heritage, not just the social justice team, but other volunteers who worked with us last year to get this rolling. And that's how we established this MPC. And you can see the different individuals here on this slide. Do you want to go? Okay, are we going to the next slide? Okay. So now, how to create time for the work. So create planning sessions and time to develop those big goals and ideas. So really, Francisca and I met weekly, and this is about our last year virtual time when we were staying at home, working at home. We would meet 3 times a week. We would contact each other through FaceTime or Zoom or text, right? Or text. And we were constantly in contact. And we also met with the committee weekly. And she and I would plan for events by contacting presenters and panelists. And it was, sometimes out of our hours, we would meet in the evenings and talk about what we envision and our goals. So it was a lot of planning. I'll give you one example. There was an individual from Gallaudet, a student, who was living in another country. And so we worked to meet during their time, which was 1 o'clock in the morning for us. We wanted to make sure that whatever community we encountered, that we could accommodate. Should I go? Is Francisca? So in my part, I focused on Kindle Demonstration Elementary School, and KLT is the instructional team. So we meet weekly. They do, their other work, and we are doing other work here. And so it's very important that we have communication between the two, because there's so much going on where they have their schedule and we have to align with our schedule. So we include everyone in KLT, and we have about 5 members, each with their own areas of focus. And there was one person who is logistics, because we're talking about scheduling. This is a very important position. So we meet weekly at 11. This is, or we would meet before work hours, 8 o'clock, 8:15 in the morning on Monday, because I knew that they would be already busy later on. So we had to be flexible with our time. And I noticed that I was doing beyond the ASL position. I would do ASL coaching, talking about how to run MC, with a few students in 101. We would talk on the weekends, to find time. I would accommodate them on the weekends sometimes. The MC presentations were preferred to be in ASL, so I had to sign all of those after we had the text arranged. So I was able to sign those, and the organization was pretty nervous, but we were very supportive. And what you see with the ladder in a recent piece, it was just basically, where am I going? So I asked to make sure that we not drop and any important holidays or multicultural, education pieces, stories, and what have you. So at the beginning of the year, we don't really have anything until February. So we have plenty of time until February. So I commend Lisa and Joseph to have something started first thing as soon as they enter the school year. So that's really tough. And it was exciting. And I hoped that they would not drop it after just a month or two. And I thought about this ladder, and I was able to climb it with this committee. And so how this grew is basically taking pieces and people with certain areas of expertise, no matter what their position was. But it was important to say, like, okay, if you're an administrator, there are certain people with certain skill sets, recruit them, talk to them about working on projects together. That's very important. Let's see. I think I've said it all. So I also wanted to add, in working at MSSD with the MLT and the leadership team, to communicate by email weekly, sending out memos to staff and teachers, as well as students. Working closely with students who need community service hours, or to encourage leadership, and confidence. So, and that all is included in multicultural.
If I could just add a little bit, just from an administrator standpoint, these two folks here have done an incredible job in coordinating amongst the different schools. The Clare Center schedule, typically what it looks like, whether it be virtual or in person. I know elementary and high school have very different schedules. The way in which they operate day to day is very different. So it requires a ton of communication in order to coordinate events, to ensure that presenters can meet with our students of all different levels, to be engaged in different activities, different grade levels. So I truly have to commend both of these ladies. I could not do my work without both of you.
Should I go? Okay. So the knowledge of each person's expertise and experience is so important when we ask for presenters for multicultural events or panelists. It's very important for all of us to recognize those experiences and reach out, even though, whether it's a panelist or a presenter. And sometimes they, even if they're from the same group, they may have different experiences and have disagreements. I'll give you an example. There's a certain name of a label of a group, and another individual may not be comfortable with that label of the group, who is also part of that group. So we acknowledge everyone's journey and each of their histories. And we're so small of a group, so it's important to be sensitive to everyone, Lisa and I work with. So I also wanted to share about the challenges and hearing out their challenges, and also their experiences with education, their journey. You can imagine children and students asking so many questions, and you can see that they crave for information. A lot of multicultural education is sparse in the classroom setting. It's not like this one. And especially to come from a deaf individual who's sharing their own experiences, the children love it. They fall into that. They're very engaged in this experience. Another thing I want to commend is communication with families. Communication with families, we do see a lot of family engagement, especially with the Kindle families, if we can. There are some other families who can't make it because they're during work hours. Some will leave work to watch their child give a presentation or participate and support other families. So that's really nice. One nice thing about KLT is they will communicate with parents in the community of what's going on. And I think it's important to have that collaboration for success. Let's see. As far as opportunity for education, I just mentioned multicultural education and what's in the textbook or those videos. Who's filming and who's printing it? Is it old information you have? Are there any deaf people included in this information? I mentioned that earlier, how authentic the education is for our students to know what is current, because these things, these people we interact with are not from the past. They are current experiences. I was reading a book with the children last week. It was about Milos Museum. The child goes to museum and feels disconnected. These people are from a long time ago. And so the child decided to set up their own museum and invite their classmates to view their home, because this is the present. This is what they experience now. So it's the same thing with the children watching. They see, oh, wow, you are the first teacher in your country. We're so beyond that in comparison, and we can have a discussion, which is really incredible. We have this virtual and in person, and yes, there are differences that are pretty amazing. Last year with work, I really poured my heart out into this. I had passion for this work, and now coming back on site, it's not the same. So I had to say, hey, Lisa, Joseph, we're trying to keep it together. I know Lisa is, but it's just not the same intensity, because we have our own schedules and we have our plans, and it's very difficult to go back to, the steps of what we were doing in COVID and the pandemic. So I would like to say one thing I did notice is that the teachers are implementing on their own in the classroom. They're incorporating information and sharing, and that is so nice. They are sharing from other departments. And we had Aunt Andrea Saunier present virtually. We've got, departments and the processes. It's all still there, but it's of course not the same. Let me turn it to Lisa. Yes, I think that the community varies. It's not all the same. What Joseph shared about the identities, you have multiple identities. Everyone does. So we have to be aware of that. And so we don't want to name names of groups because we want to respect all groups. Basically, our experiences, we've seen conflict and challenge. And I can share examples of how groups people within groups have different labels, have different signs, different languages, and we try to be mindful of using all, of recognizing all, to reduce any conflicts that may arise, and not to follow just one way, but use all and recognize all. We want to give the students a place to grow in their identity and feel where they can fit, not allow someone to decide for them. So we give them a lot of different ideas and perspectives so they can assess who they are and grow. That's an important part of their journey. And so really a high level of communication. We constantly have communicated with planning, with logistics, with budgeting, really doing things ahead of time, especially not at the last minute. So we feel that it's not respectful for any particular culture to require something last minute. We want to give them a lot of time to plan before we're setting up, as we're setting up for events. We have to make sure that we plan ahead, and we need approval. We have a lot of back and forth once we have an idea of who we want to present. So we need prior planning. When we send out email, it's important that we are careful of our word choices. I have to read and make sure I'm saying the right thing to particular communities without offense or without any misunderstanding. So that's a challenge for me that I've realized, and especially identities and signs vary so much. A dialogue to transform, meaning setting up a healing space for certain groups to allow them to share their experiences, to see those experiences and understand who they are. You know, like Francisca said, there were so many questions. There's always so many questions from students because they're reflecting on how they identify with certain people. So sometimes they go and earn community service hours, and they're allowed to write a reflection of what they learned in certain workshops. We want to be mindful that this is not only for a student's opportunity, but staff to learn as well. Yes, she and I have gotten emails from teachers that have expressed how much they've learned. So it's important to be mindful of their identity and journey. And like Joseph said, all identities are multiple. So allow them to find their identity. Don't correct them. Allow them to just be. Yeah, so we'll go to the next slide. So I work with different groups of children and students, and I have for a long time with kindergarten, first and second graders. And so I kind of want to work with the middle school group. I know I try to see what they need. And I've been able to observe during this process of MPC with Lisa. So I wrote a proposal and sent it to Joseph and Bileski at CAOS, and they accepted it. So I moved forward in having 6 students who were interested for us to interview BIPOC students at Gallaudet. And now let me back up just a minute. We had mock interviews, what questions we wanted to ask. So we had developed those questions and talked about what we would look for in the interview. And we went through that during my little free time I had daily, had the interactions with each of the students. And finally, I was able to get some folks together, and the professionals, the students, and we had a virtual session where I closed my video and did not participate. I just observed, and the questions from one paper became 2, 3, 4 pages of what answers and questions were asked and answered. I was so happy to do this project because I didn't want to just do a panel after panel. I wanted another framework for this education. And I felt that interview was great. It was based on their interest, not on our questions or a committee's questions. And so what I found is a theme: to continue, to persevere, to not give up. The next one was sports safety. You know, one was a football player, and someone asked, "Oh, football?" And they said, "Well, but your head, you would have a head injury because I went to the hospital." And so you got that kind of feedback and discussion. A third takeaway was a connection I saw. It was almost 50 minutes of dialogue. It was supposed to be 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe. But this was from they talked about gym shoes all the way to check in on how you feel about police brutality, what's going on with the Black Lives Movement or Matter movement. And so this student was only a sophomore and was wanting to check in. And, the interviewee said, I understand police brutality and I see what's going on out there and it's really wrong. And this discussion got really deep and it really made an impact. And the parent was watching too. And I felt like that was really impactful. And another student asked, well, why don't we have enough Black teachers? So that was a question that was posed. Where are the Black administrators, principals? I want a Black principal at my school. And so that was, their space to talk about their thoughts. And I didn't realize, when we were doing this project, what would happen, but I'm so glad it did. And I was so grateful for the two teachers, Lisa Bennington and Joshua Lewis. Their support in this really made this successful. So yeah, thank you to those two middle school teachers. Go ahead, Joseph.
I apologize for interrupting. I know we have so much more to discuss, but I just got a heads up from Nancy that we only have about 3 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe the three of us could go ahead and wrap up with showing our Brown Girl video. That could be our last couple of minutes spent with that. This is a video that was produced by Kindle students. They received support from our teachers and staff. This video is a poem by an author there. You will see this briefly. And we're hoping to introduce this as a sample of some of the work and some of the things we've been doing with our students as part of our multicultural work. And the author is Lisa Honor. And so I'll go ahead and stop video while we watch this. I'm Say Johnny. I'm Shakira. I'm Aaliyah. Hello, I'm Gaitan. What's up? I'm Mila. My name is Kaylee. My name is Leanna. Hi, my name's Kimora. Brown girl, what do you see? I see a vice president that looks like me. Brown girl, what do you do? I fought, I hoped, I spoke what was true. Brown girl, what do you know? That there are strong women who want me to grow. Brown girl, what do you feel? That hashtag Black Girl Magic will help us all heal. Brown girl, what do you see? A world that sees my skin before it sees me. Brown girl, what do you do? March, fight, and create till I make this world new. Brown girl, how are you so strong? Because I got queens in my blood to help push me along. Thank you so much for your time, for listening to us today. I don't know if we actually have time remaining for the Q&A. I think
Yeah,
we're probably out of time.
yeah, thank you so much. I think if we have one lucky person to ask a question, if the next presentation ends and we have enough time, we can definitely ask more questions at the end. So if we have one person that wants to raise their hand or ask a question at this time. There are many comments for you, so please read through the chat. Well, Joseph and your co-presenters, I really want to thank the three of you for what a great presentation it was. It really thought-provoking moments, and it's just requiring more small group roundtable discussions. I'm sure several of us are willing to have those discussions and ask the questions of how we can apply this and make these changes across our schools and universities and colleges, because I really think that this is such critical work. So thank you, all three. Okay, are we ready for our next presentation? So our topic is fostering joy. There are families and professionals collaborating together, and how that all comes into play. I mean, this first presentation with the second one, what a connection. So our first presentation, great. Now I want to welcome Amy Zarkowski. She is the director of the Institute and the Clinic at the Children's Center for Communication, and that's at Beverly School for the Deaf. She is also a faculty member at Boston's Children's Hospital and a professor at Harvard Medical School. Our second presenter for Fostering Joy, and I know you, lucky me, is Candace Lindahl Davies. She is the Director of Outreach for the national organization, National Hands and Voices. Okay, well, I am going to turn the floor over to you both. And before we proceed, I just realized, did you want to spotlight the interpreters, or do you just prefer for all audience members to pen? What is the preference here? You can each individually pen, or we can spotlight. Just let me know, and enjoy the presentation.
Okay, this is Amy. Can you see my screen, the Fostering Joy presentation? Need a thumbs up? Okay. I think I need to pin Candace so that I can see my co-presenter. Here we are. Okay. It is our pleasure to be here today to share about fostering joy, and it's always my pleasure to present with Candace. We're going to be talking about this family professional partnership and invite you to be thinking about how you in your respective schools and programs can be considering fostering joy, how you might encourage professionals and families that you work with to sign up for the resources we're going to tell you about, and hopefully to convince you that there's some value in shifting some thinking toward fostering joy going forward. Thank you again for the chance to be here. So while you have two of us today, we are just two members of the core team. And the core team is comprised of family members and leaders who are parent leaders, professionals from a variety of backgrounds, as well as deaf and hard of hearing adults who are central to this core team too. So here's just a couple of pictures of Candace and I with our families. And we want to kind of emphasize that because this really, the focus is on families. So although fostering joy has professional and family arms that we're going to be discussing, the focus, the idea of this is really how do we help families to feel joyful in their journey of raising, supporting, and growing children who are deaf or hard of hearing. I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I recognize that we have had some difficult times ongoing and in the last couple of years. And one of the things I think is important and relevant when we're talking about fostering joy is the recognition that you don't only experience joy in happy times, and we'll talk about why that's really important, but that fostering joy can be even more relevant in times that are a little bit more difficult. So it's not a coding over or an ignoring of the fact that times have been tough. It also isn't contributing to like the toxic positivity that you're hearing some things about, and there are some books out there by that title. Really, this movement of fostering joy is aimed at saying, how do we support families and the professionals who support those families to find the joy in the moments of real life? You may have heard of the back of the napkin experience. Sometimes people talk about that, you have an idea, you write it down on the napkin so that you capture it. And that is really how fostering joy sort of started. I won't delve into the history too much, just to say that at a conference where there were professionals and family members, there was a very real experience of seeing family members who are attending sessions and being told things like, language is really important. Make sure you're signing or you're speaking or you're having auditory access for your child who's deaf or hard of hearing. Make sure you're doing that all the time, from the moment they wake up until they go to bed, because there's this important language window. And families feeling like, well, how do we do that? And can we really be responsible for being in teaching mode all the time? And so myself and some other folks, including Janet DeGeorge, who is the director of Hands and Voices, were a part of this small group that sort of said, we need to shift the conversation from parents, you must do this, kind of with an emphasis on you're responsible, and if you don't do it, that's bad news, to how do we help families to feel empowered to do the things that they need to do to support their children who are deaf or hard of hearing as they grow. So from the very beginning, from moment one, it was a collaboration between parent leaders, professionals, sort of thinking we need to shift this conversation. And that has been something that's been really important to us to maintain throughout this time together with Fostering Joy, is this collaboration.
Yeah. And this is Candace, and certainly from my point of view as a parent, I joined on a little bit after that initial conversation, but as an eager member, because as a parent of a young man now who is deaf and has multiple health issues, it was particularly poignant for us to find some things to kind of latch on to, because there was so much going on in our family as we were just finding out news about our sons not only being identified as profoundly deaf and kind of the new journey that we were on with that, but also the journey of finding out about all the other health issues that he had. And so admittedly, it was a bit of a roller coaster in the beginning. And that blissful time that should be really just kind of precious and unique when you're just, meeting your newborn infant, can sometimes be kind of whisked away and overshadowed by worry and concern And then all this pressure, like Amy had talked about what do we need to be doing, and I need to be doing it all the time, and that sense of urgency to get it all done, but yet I have this infant that I'm not quite sure I know yet. So for us and for other parents, I think like myself, you need to kind of have a new approach, something different to kind of latch on to really kind of get you back to that square one of that child, that parent, that bond that just naturally should occur and really shouldn't be interrupted or broken. And I'll give my husband credit actually for this. It was his science brain, he's a scientist by background, that literally said to me, in the midst of all my worry and concern, the world needs to prove, they need to show on paper the actual proof that this child is going to not achieve what we thought he always would set out to be. In fact, prove me wrong, world, show us that he's not going to do what we think he's going to do, because no one really has a crystal ball for this child. And so for me and our family, and even when we were struck with new diagnoses just a few years ago, we went back to that square one of, no, wait a minute, this doesn't have to redefine what we know about our child. This does not have to redefine how we operate as a family. We can still have that bond with our child. We can still focus on the positive. He has amazing innate qualities and gifts that we need to really spend more time and more focus on. And that's the piece that's going to carry us forward. So for me, fostering joy has been a rock. It's been a foundation. It's been a place to stand when the world seems to teeter. It's that solid ground. And the fact that there's now a community that I can latch on to, that is even better, because it just puts that feeling of, I'm not in this alone. There are other people that are going through this too. And look, watch out, world. Look what this kid has to offer. Next slide. So you've heard a little bit about our family, but what I'd like to do is share a little bit about some other amazing families who have also joined on to this movement, this idea of fostering joy even amidst some trials and tribulations. And just to step back a moment, even just to kind of reiterate, because some people do ask, like, why would a parent lose joy? Like, what happens there? And I try to explain that it's the undoing of what they thought they knew. It's the unexpected, it's the unfamiliar, it's the uncertain, right? The news for many families is unexpected, right? The new parenting that you need to adopt is unfamiliar. The future that you're looking out into might feel uncertain. But families have found that fostering joy with all these uns can be replaced by some other amazing words like, how about resilience, or triumph, or defiance even, or pride, or community. And with all of that collectively, I think that's what leads to joy. So here's an example. A mom who's deaf herself, 2 kids. The first one was identified also as deaf. The second one identified is hearing, but the second one has autism. Her joy started to slip away when the other child was also, the deaf child was identified as having autism as well. And so she literally felt like, wait a minute, I thought I knew what the plan was here, and the plan now has shifted again. And she literally glommed on to fostering joy as a way to journal, to write about the experience, to find herself again, and to re-celebrate what her child has, because she had kind of a tool, a mechanism to do that. And another story of a mom who has 3 kids, all deaf. And again, each one of them was having an additional diagnosis, actually vision loss, that the kids are going through their teenage years, which is a pretty difficult time anyway, right? And with those 3 kids, some of those days are pretty rough, because the kids themselves are being given news of change, of the future that maybe seems a bit uncertain for them. And as a family, they've committed to, amidst those days when they knew something was going to be coming around the corner, they were going to hunt down and find joy as a family. And just yesterday, she shared that, with the big doctor appointment coming up today, They went out in the garden, looked for the bulbs that they had planted last year, saw those bulbs coming up, and here's the tulips, here's the daffodils, here's those things. Use the senses that this child has to take all that information in, the touching, the smelling, everything that that child could, and celebrate that joy for that day as a preemptive move to what was happening the next day. So that really is the essence and the embodiment of fostering joy.
We are fortunate to be sponsored by two organizations that recognize the value of sponsoring joy and the value of this partnership. So we've talked about it being these two arms, one of them a professional arm and one of them a family arm. And so Hands and Voices headquarters, the national organization, sponsors the Fostering Joy families stuff. And there is a website that has resources that are available. Families can be encouraged to seek that out. There is an addition of Fostering Joy Families Facebook group that is closed, and it's for families only. Professionals are not invited there. That really is a place where families have found a community, and that's amazing. And on the other side, the professional side, the Institute at the Children's Center for Communication, Beverly School for the Deaf, CEASD, is sponsoring the professional side. And there also is a website for Fostering Joy professionals. There is a Facebook group for professionals as well. And both of those arms now have working groups. And we extend an invitation to you. If this, as we're talking about this, sounds like something you might be interested in, you should feel free to think about, do I want to contribute to that, either through Facebook group or the more active working group that is working to figure out what are the things, how can we get this out there? What are the things that we really need? Just an example on the professional side of a working group thing, there's a group of audiologists who say, you know, we have a lot of people, families who are in waiting rooms. Maybe we can have brochures, postcard size things that share information about fostering joy that we can put in those clinical spaces. So there's a group of audiologists who are working on that. And then other professionals who are also saying, in my role, whatever that might be, what are the ways that we can move this forward? So that's kind of an exciting thing. The working groups are relatively new because the core team has been doing stuff together. So it's a nice way to extend the opportunities to be involved to more people and to further spread the word.
And Amy, this is Candace. I did drop a couple of those links in the.
Perfect.
So.
This is just that mission, that's that idea of coming together to celebrate the joy of raising a child who's deaf or hard of hearing and helping to foster their development. Because of where we are, because of who we are, and because of where we are, we don't align with any particular philosophy regarding communication or modality or those kinds of things. That really, this is for children who are deaf or deaf plus, deaf with disability. Any of those children have people around them, families that support them, and we want to support them in whatever it is that that particular child needs to optimize their growth and development.
Yeah, this is Candace. I love this quote. And it's just, I think it speaks to how adopting kind of a fostering joy idea is really, kind of sound a little dramatic, kind of a lifestyle, right? So when you choose joy, you feel good. And when you feel good, you do good. And when you do good, it reminds you that, you know, what joy feels like and that other people can be inspired by that as well. So I love that. And I love the idea, the analogy that we use in fostering joy about breathing. What breathing is to meditation, intentionality is to fostering joy. And so for anyone who's maybe done some meditation or yoga, you know, when you use your breathing as a mechanism to really unclutter the chatter in your head and unclutter your environment and really put that focus on what you're doing in order to really rip kind of away all that negativity or what might be kind of a barrier to how you're going to, you know, move through your day in a positive way. The same goes with fostering joy, that intentionality about taking time to really focus on being positive and finding and creating moments with your child that, dropping the dishes for 5 seconds, going off and doing something together as a family, really making the intention around creating those moments for yourself, for your child, for your family, and for that whole social emotional development. That is such a strong focus. So that intentional practice really is just important for our movement. And then I wanted to give you a couple of examples because a couple of our core team members had a great idea, and that was to create a video. And by making a video, call out to the parents themselves and ask them, what does joy mean to you? Not just what it means to us, what does it mean to you? And what was so beautiful is that there was this flurry of videos and pictures and quotes that came back in, and it was just so wonderful to see just how much parents were already, this idea of fostering joy was resonating with them, and they were so easily able to kind of convey back. And so in this case, this is our little guy, Axel, who's amazing. And what I love about this picture is not only the fact that they're, celebrating the independence, the actual achievement of some milestone. That is a huge deal for a kid. And we went through this with our little guy. So to see a little guy like this is just, it brings back such memories, but also to then see the smile on that child's face. That is the outcome that we are looking for. Not just does it make us feel better and prideful, but what's the impact on that child? Does that child feel like they are special and they are can be proud of themselves and they have accomplished something? Because who doesn't want that independence, that freedom, that power that comes with kind of living into your true self? So, and the gratitude that comes with it is just extra special. And the same thing with this one too, that, every child is so different. So just because, my child maybe has some additional health issues in addition to being deaf or hard of hearing, and also does this child, it doesn't mean those two children are anywhere or alike or that had the same experience, but yet through the idea of fostering joy, you can share that commonality of celebrating those accomplishments. And that I think has been wonderful just to see. And I think we have 1,400 parents gathered in our Facebook group right now who are all, being able to understand without anyone going into any explanation. When someone posts a quote like this, joy is communicating heart to heart, you don't have to explain it. They just know, they get it. And there's a way for everyone just to kind of rally around that family and celebrate with them. So that to me is just the really fun part of all of this.
We were quite intentional, I think, about talking about children who are deaf and deaf with disabilities or deaf plus. And what we found really is that families who have children who are deaf plus are really capitalizing on these resources. And so it's not limited, or, it's certainly open to all. We're very intentional about being inclusive, and that seems to be having some impact, so that's really nice to see. Shifting just a little bit to the science of joy, we talked about how breathing to meditation as intentionality is to joy. And so there is some science to suggest that is also true. That when we, some new science that came out just last year, that when we focus on our own good fortunes or the good fortunes of others and recognize others' achievements, it activates the reward system in the brain. The brain seeks that out. That's like a little hit of positiveness. And then that, the more that we experience that, the more then we seek that out and see that in other circumstances. So by being intentional about focusing on the joy, we actually are bringing more joy to our life, not just in that moment, but we're priming ourselves to see it more and be ready for it as well in the future. Some of those changes in the brain are pretty fascinating. When we are thinking of joyful things and we're being mindfully joyful, all it takes is 2 minutes. People then report higher levels of life satisfaction. They report higher levels of happiness, and they report greater trust with those around them. So if you imagine, if you're a professional and you're engaging with families and you ask the question, instead of the family comes in and you're asking about the child's development. Are they doing this on the checklist? Are they doing this? Are they doing this? When the family has to say, no, it's disconnecting, right? if you open those conversations with things like, tell me the thing in the last week or so that's brought you the most joy with your child, and that sets your foundation for that interaction. It shifts how that interaction goes, and families feel greater trust. They're more likely to follow your advice and follow through with recommendations that you might offer. There's a lot of like downstream possible good things that can come from setting that foundation, starting with joy. Additionally, we pay a lot more attention. There's the negativity bias, and we all have this. So we pay more attention to things that are negative than positive. So for most people, you have to hear 5 good things in order to counteract the one negative thing that you might hear. When you choose to focus on joy, you are naturally increasing the positive things you hear, quote unquote, or the positive things that are in your world, because you're noticing them to a greater degree. So it matters a little bit less about what's happening externally and a little bit more about like, I'm thinking about something that brought me joy. So that builds up that joy thing. And so the things that do happen, quote unquote, in the real world that are negative, they have less impact when you start to train your brain to do that. So in fact, when we pay attention to good stuff, according to Hansen in the paper that was published just last month, that it really rewires the brain. The brain becomes more able to notice happiness and to stay in that happiness time when we're able to do that. Pretty neat. This is certainly not the first group that's talked about gratitude. I mean, Oprah's been around for a long time and talking about gratitude journals, but it does seem to, the science is building around why that matters. We also, in our world, one of the things we do is that we work harder to avoid losing something than we do gaining something. For example, if you ask many people who bet, losing money, even if it's a small amount, feels worse than the possibility of gaining more money. So that idea and how we kind of use that in our everyday life, we're more likely to just maintain the status quo than we are to take risks, even when the payout could be very positive. But gratitude helps us to shift that a little bit, to say, I'm grateful for what I have, so I don't have to feel clingy onto the things that I have, if that makes sense. And it allows us to be a little bit more open and to say, whether this turns out okay or less okay than I anticipate, I'm still willing to give it a try. And that's a really nice attitude to be able to take into interactions that we have with families and with other professionals. Science also suggests that when something is good is happening and you take the time to slow yourself down and say, I want this to happen, or you look at your child who, you've been working on something together. If we look at Axel and his independence as our example, and then you see those first steps, when you really take the time to notice those things, the benefit of the work that you've put in or the milestones that have been reached are greater, right? You experience them as being bigger, more impactful. One of the things that we've done is to have a tip sheet, which is available on the website, and it's actually available in a number of languages. I think we're at 7 or 8 or 10 languages, because we feel like that's really important, that many professionals maybe use English in their working world, but many professionals work with families whose home languages are different. And so it can be really nice to be able to say, family who comes from Vietnam, here is in your own language, a tip sheet that can help to guide you to be thinking about how do you foster joy in your children. These tips also came from families. So one of the things that we sent out questionnaires and got input and put them together. Families said this is what really is helpful. So we were trying to combine that family-based input with some of the science that sort of says this really does seem to move people in the direction of experiencing greater joy.
And this is Candace. I was just going to add too that in addition to the written English translations, we have an ASL version coming out soon. So that will be uploaded to the website.
Yes. Yeah.
And as far as tools go, I had kind of alluded to one earlier with the one mom that found joy through writing. That was something that she kind of abandoned in the past, thinking she was too busy, that couldn't be something that she could do anymore, and then revisited that once she heard about the Fostering Joy Journal that we've created. So this is created for families with the intention that they would have a vehicle to jot down and be prompted to think about things that might help them, again, put that intentionality back into their day. So, questions like, what do I dream of? Did I experience joy recently? Write that down. Just ways to kind of capture those moments. And then what's really exciting too is that this has already been translated into Spanish, and that's going to be available soon as well. And we have a sister project led by deaf and hard of hearing individuals who have created a Fostering Joy journal for kids, with the idea that ideally a deaf adult role model, or any grown-up really, but we were hoping it would be a deaf and hard of hearing adult would be the one that would work on that journaling with that child, in order to create, again, some self-esteem and that awareness of, wow, look at me, but look at this person who can help me kind of express myself as this powerful individual. So those are all available as well. And I can plunk the link to that in the chat.
I did want to just mention here too that we recognize that fathers may experience joy differently. We've had feedback from one dad who said, I wouldn't use the word joy. It's not very cool. So we are also looking at how do we make fostering joy inclusive in that regard too. And we do have some input from some dads, including dads of children who are deaf or hard of hearing, dads who are social workers, who are interested in sort of building that. So there's lots of ways I think that we got to start from a good place, and we're seeking out other input that will help us to continue to be inclusive and mindful and growing in the right direction. While that tip sheet for families is available on the Fostering Joy Families page through Hands and Voices, there is also information on the Fostering Joy Professionals page on the CEASD site. And one of them is just this idea of what are some prompts that you might be able to use with families. Some of the folks who are part of the professionals team are early interventionists, and they're saying it's really helpful when we have regular opportunities to be with families every week or every couple of weeks. When you ask those prompts, one of the people has shared, now she has a family that thinks about it, and the mom will write down, on a Tuesday, for example, she'll say, that was very joyful. I'm going to write it down so that I can tell my early interventionists when I see them on Thursday, I'm going to have something because I know they're going to ask me. And then it just helps them to, throughout the week, be looking for those opportunities of fostering joy and mindful around that. So it's not only in that moment when the professional is engaging with the family, but by asking those prompting questions, you're helping families to be thinking about it much more frequently as well. And some of the professionals have shared that it has changed how they're interacting with families, how they feel about it, that they might be in the past going into a session where a child wasn't making the progress they were hoping for, and it might have been frustrating, but instead they're framing things from the place of, what's been great. And so anytime you get the opportunity to hear a family member talk about what's great about their kid, if you're a professional who's gone into this work, that's lovely and delightful, right? So it doesn't matter on that checklist, again, if they're doing all the things, doesn't matter. We're just talking about, from the family's perspective, what's the child doing that's amazing, and how can we help to celebrate that? So I think that these little prompts can be a very nice way to incorporate in a few minutes time ways to foster joy within sessions for families, and then having an impact on families and professionals even beyond those sessions. I think that anytime you attend a talk, it's also helpful to think, how does this apply to me? What are the things that I might be able to take away or to learn from this? Even if you've enjoyed going to a talk or hearing from somebody speak, it doesn't, unless you sort of say, here's how I'm going to make it work, you might forget about it. So we did want to just throw that out there and say, how will you make this work for you? Or what might you do? We're going to hold questions till the end, but I think planting that seed for what could you do if you are an administrator at a school or a program for children who are deaf? What are ways that you could incorporate fostering joy through professional development, through encouraging those that you work with to sign up or join the Facebook group, through having a presentation about this topic, through exploring what is some of the science around fostering joy? There's lots and lots of ways that you might do that. But I would like you to just take a moment and think, what can I do? Here's something. What can you identify? We did mention those Facebook groups, and these are just the banners for them. And I know that Candace already has shared links to Facebook and the websites. And then I certainly want to invite any thoughts that you might have about working groups. So even if you're not wanting to raise your hand and commit to yet another task, you could also let us know what are some outcomes that you might like to see, right? Are there things that you would find really helpful? Because we do have professionals and family members who are eager and want to work on stuff. And we want to make sure that any of the outputs that we generate through fostering joy are meaningful to those who could use them and benefit from them. So that would be useful to us as well, too, just letting us know, what do you need from us? What would be useful?
And this is Candace. I was just going to add too that anyone with connections to fathers that might be interested in helping with the father piece, I know that's something we're very eager to have more folks kind of working on that project. So yeah, just want to put a plug in for that for us.
Yeah, definitely. There's, some work in the area that suggests that fathers are just as likely as mothers to want to be involved, but sometimes the ways in which programs have been set up aren't as inclusive, or they're set up not being mindful of different time constraints, different things like that. So I think there's much that as a field, broader field, like collectively those who support children who are deaf or hard of hearing and their families, I think there's a lot we can do to be more inclusive and inviting to fathers. So certainly would welcome any input on that. We have talked about, we've kind of self-anointed ourselves and those who work with us Joy Ambassadors. And that's a title that we kind of proudly boast when we're doing this work, because it just feels like, it's not an official thing, but it really is this idea, like I'm taking on the commitment to saying, I want to support families. I want to support those who are supporting children who are deaf or hard of hearing, because it's something that we're passionate about. So if you're interested in sort of joining the movement and you're a professional, certainly feel free to reach out as the professional lead, and Candace is the family lead. And so if you have families that are super excited about this work, you can send them that way. We would love to get them on listservs or get them signed up or chat with them about things if that would be useful.
And this is Candace. I was just going to add too that this is just such a perfect alignment with what happens at the schools for the deaf anyway, because there's so much positivity and role modeling and self-esteem building that just happens naturally at a school for the deaf. And so I just hope that, a lot of this is like, we do this, but maybe just embracing the idea that we do this together. The idea of fostering joy is something that, innately is happening, but, how can we help parents be more mindful of exactly how that might play out in a day-to-day basis and daily activities. So, but I think it's so perfectly aligned with what all these folks are doing.
Yeah, Amy here. I agree. And I think that a lot of schools and programs are doing things like social emotional learning. And certainly this is part of that. But the idea of social emotional learning kind of focuses on the child. Like we need to help the child to understand emotions. And we do, and have words and signs and labels for them, to be able to express them and regulate them. All of that true. Yet, if we put it sort of in a fostering joy context, it doesn't put the onus or the responsibility only on the child. It really is much more of how do we make that home environment, or all of the environments in which the children are, how do we help to make that celebrate them, right? Which is a little bit like, if you just expand upon that social emotional stuff, this incorporates a little bit more and says that we collectively can also create environments that help to foster those abilities.
Exactly.
With that, I will stop sharing and invite any questions that you might have.
This is Candace. Don't be shy. We can take it.
Or we can hand it back over to the organizers and say, thank you so much for having us.
Mhm. Thank you both so much for that presentation. Oh, yes, we do have a question from another Nancy. So Nancy, do you have a question? Go for it. Yes, I do. It's really a comment. You're muted, Nancy.
I really just want to say thank you for your work and for reminding us that joy is important to any successful endeavor. And, you know, joy and sorrow often travel together, and our field sometimes focuses on the sorrow. Our parents often focus on the sorrow as they grieve with all the changes. But the joy that we bring, research also shows us that joyful people are often more productive and are often more resilient. And resilience is something we want to build in our students and in our families. So I really thank you for the time you've spent thinking about this and sharing it with all of us. And so may you be joyful.
Thank you, Nancy.
And thank you for the comments in the chat too. So appreciated. I'm glad that Fostering Joy is already getting some spread by folks just mentioning what they're doing already. So appreciate it. And as a parent, yes, I cannot thank you enough for having this opportunity.
You know, I just appreciate you both making that connection between the schools and the families that we serve and the professionals, that collaboration, which is so vital. You know, we all have the same positive feelings that we want for our students and our children to thrive. And so I just have to thank both of you. We are going to wrap up this morning's, well, I guess this afternoon's presentation, but thank you all for being part of it. So feel free to come up on video and wave and say bye to everyone. Thank you so much. Let's show your cameras, people. Don't be shy.